Well, I'd like to welcome you all today. What we do here in these stories from the archive, we tell stories about things that I found in our collection, as well as stories about our area and our region. The University Archive, West Florida History Center, we cover the 10 counties of the Panhandle from the earliest settlement of this area to the present. And this story comes out of something I found in the archives some time ago and got me curious, and I developed this talk that I think you'll enjoy today. I decided to do this for March because, as some of you may know, NASA is getting ready to launch Artemis um, mission, probably sometime beginning around the April 1st. The dates are going to depend on the weather and the trajectory, but it will be a manned crew that we are going to send up and orbit the moon and come back. It will be the first time that we've sent anyone to the moon in decades. Um, so I thought maybe the story of our little space traveler from Pensacola, Miss Baker, might be a fun thing to talk about today. And I could give you a little background here. On October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first artificial Earth satellite called Sputnik 1. It orbited the Earth every 96 seconds and with a broadcast a radio pulse until the batteries ran out after 21 days, and it burned up on re-entry on October 26, 1957. Its launch shocked the United States, began putting full resources into a program of rocket testing, developing satellites, and developing programs toward putting humans in space. The biggest question about this was whether life could survive in outer space. In short, whether living beings could survive the rigors of launch, orbital speed, cosmic radiation, weightlessness, and perhaps other dangers that we knew nothing about. If this wasn't enough shock in October of 1957, on November 3rd, the next month, 1957, the Soviets startled the world again by launching Sputnik 2, carrying a heavy payload and a dog named Laika. She became the first living passenger to survive being launched into orbit to orbit the Earth, and it was reported at the time that she died when the oxygen supply ran out day 6 of the mission. Actually, it took 50 years before we could get into the Soviet archive, and we actually discovered she actually died within hours after the launch, possibly by overheating, information that we did not find out till the year 2002. Now, Laika was a stray mongrel from the streets of Moscow, and she was chosen because animals thought that these feral dogs and cats, animals in the streets of Moscow, had already learned to endure conditions of extreme cold and hunger. And so the American, her name was Laika. We called it Sputnik 2, but American called her Mutnik. And her launch was the culmination of Soviet ballistic flights in 1951, where they had launched at least 12 dogs into suborbital flight, not full orbital flights around the world. Well, following the Sputnik launches, 1 and 2, a lot of pressure and fear um, increased on the Congress and the White House to do quickly funding space exploration. And they funded initiatives under the way by the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force. NASA had not been created yet. So the Air Force reported in 1959 that they were working on the ability to monitor cockpit environment during a launch. They hoped to be able to monitor the cockpit environment, such as temperature, pressure, altitude, cosmic radiation, acceleration profile, cabin air composition, and they hoped for the occupant of whatever they launched up, they would be able to monitor their blood pressure, pulse, heart rate, oxygen rate, carbon dioxide, other kinds of things. And so they decided that they would try sending up a rhesus monkey and all. Now, as they proceeded with that, meanwhile, in Pensacola, uh, the Navy, the Navy purchased. So we have two programs going on. The Army are doing their thing, and the Navy is doing theirs. And meanwhile, in Pensacola, Florida, the Navy purchased 25 squirrel monkeys from a pet shop in Miami, Florida, and they brought them to Pensacola to the United States School of Aviation Medicine in Pensacola. And here the staff began working with the monkey, testing their intelligence, their ability to withstand solitary confinement, and getting them used to having an electrode placed on their bodies, and testing them with simple tasks. Eventually, they winnowed their group of 25 down to 14 possible candidates, and among them, one of them stood out. She was a 1 pound squirrel monkey, very intelligent, and had a loving and docile manner, and she loved being handled by the staff, and they called her TLC. Now, the problem was that um, the military didn't want these animals to have names. They decided to use the phonetic alpha. Abel and Baker. The Army monkey was named Abel, and the Navy monkey was named Baker. And she was 7 pounds, reddish brown monkey, and they just loved her here. And the Army candidate was Miss Abel. The Pensacola candidate became Miss Baker. And so they tested her with a lot of different, so they had to put a lot of different kinds of testing instruments together, to try to figure out what they could launch and how they could test them. Um, I think this is interesting because this is a prototype capsule, but as you can see, it's made out of a 22-gallon oil drum. So the Navy and the Army were really casting around trying to get equipment. And this is an idea of the prototype for a capsule, or their idea of a capsule. Um, and the idea being, could the monkey survive? Could the monkey be quiet? Could it accept, or would it panic? That kind of thing. And so they devised little seats that they could strap the monkeys in, and get them ready for flight. And here's another one. This one's another one, a performance test. Um, and they wanted to see if they could keep a monkey in a little capsule for at least 5 days. They weren't sure how long they would orbit or use, but this was their part of the testing. And here's another example of some of the other kinds of testing equipment that the Army and the Navy were using. Notice the Folger coffee can. Um, they're really they're really pasting this together because this is a really a new field, and a lot of pressure to do things. On May 28th, 1959, a Jupiter rocket. Actually, this was not a rocket. This was an intermediate stage ballistic missile. It lifted off from Cape Canaveral, carrying Miss Babel and Miss Baker to an altitude of near 360 miles and 1,700 miles downrange from Cape Canaveral. The flight lasted 16 minutes, including 9 minutes of weightlessness. Miss Abel, the Army monkey, had been trained to press a key, like a telegraph key, every time a red light flashed, and they were trying to do that, but that apparatus broke down before the flight. And this is a picture of what the little capsule looked like for Miss Baker and her capsule. They were recovered by the USS Kiowa off Antigua after they spotted the glowing nose cone fall to the sea about 3:45 a.m. and about 250 miles southeast of San Juan, Puerto Rico. Notice I said 3:45 a.m. The um, the military was carrying out these very quietly, and they didn't want a lot of publicity in case these rockets blew up on them and had problems. So this launch occurred in the early hours of the morning. So 16 minutes and 9 minutes of weightlessness. Um, and the flight also included other things because they were testing all of these things: human blood, E. coli, onion, mustard, corn seed, yeast, and so forth. Um, and we did bring them back. They tried germinating a lot of them to see if any abnormalities resulted from their exposure to outer space, and nothing happened. And this is a map of where the launch, and then where it splashed down near They were recovered by the USF Kiowa as a parachute eased their fall in the last stage of descent, and the cone or capsule floated on the water and recovered by Navy frogmen about 25 minutes after splashdown. The ship reported that neither monkey showed any ill effect, and they were flown to Andrews Air Force Base from San Juan, Puerto Rico. And this is a picture uh, from uh, from the Kiowa and their crew with Miss Abel. I have to mention these electrodes. Today they stick them on our skin, but these electrodes, because they were worried about the monkeys, were actually surgically inserted into them. They could be removed, but they were inserted into them so that they wouldn't shake loose or fall out during the flight. Miss Abel was taken to Walter Reed Army Hospital, and Miss Baker was taken to Bethesda, Maryland Naval Medical Center for their post-flight checkup. Dr. Donald Dulkin of the Navy Aviation Medicine Branch here in Pensacola described Miss Baker when met her as the biggest ham in the world. And what they did was they had a press conference uh, soon after they came back. And this is a press conference where NASA, which now oversaw the space program, they had a little press conference. Donald Dulkin is from the U.S. Navy School of Aviation Medicine here in Pensacola. He's introducing the monkeys. You can see Miss Baker on the left, the tiniest monkey closest to Donald, and Miss Abel, the Army monkey, on the far right, from their sizes. Dulkin called Miss Baker the biggest damn ham in the world, and she happily posed for Dozen in a picture. Both monkeys were described as uneasy during their plane flight from to Walter Reed. And Miss Baker, they gave her a little tiny jacket due to her sensitivity uh, to temperature. At the news conference the day after the arrival, there was some jockeying among the agencies of who would take credit for this, and it was finally agreed that the news conference would be held by NASA because they had furnished $151,000 to the Army to fly the monkey, that is, for the ballistic missile. And at the news conference, NASA was very careful to say, oh, this had nothing to do with Project Mercury. Project Mercury was their manned space program. Now, following the press conferences, the monkeys returned to their testing lab, especially to have the electrodes removed. Unfortunately, Miss Abel was taken to the Army Medical Research Laboratory at Fort Knox, Kentucky. Where she reported in good health, active, and happily eating. Each of the monkeys had these electrodes planted in. Miss Abel had three electrodes, one in her right shoulder and one others located above her left and right groin area. The right one became infected, and the Army decided they would have to operate to remove it. During the operation under a light anesthetic, uh, she developed cardiac fibrillation and died. And she was autopsied to determine the cause of death, and especially they were worried if it was related to the space flight or possibly radiation, but it was not. But they figured it was reaction to the anesthesia. After her death, she was stuffed, and she's on display today at the National Air Museum in Washington, D.C. And Miss Baker, the little monkey, returned to her home in Pensacola, Florida, and had her electrode removed with no trouble. On June 15th, Miss Abel and Miss Baker made the front page of Life magazine in color, and this brought more notoriety to Miss Baker on the right. Tiny little monkey, looked like she's sucking her thumb. I mean, this is a cute little girl. And she is now become America's first surviving animal from space travel. And she brought back here to Pensacola to live at the Naval School of Aviation Medicine. There's a picture of her. Again, another picture. I'm coming to this one. Um, and that people began, the Navy began getting bombarded with information. People wanting to see this little monkey and all. The Navy gave a presentation to the Pensacola Lion Club at their San Carlos hotel meeting on June 26, 1959, talking about their launch preparation. And they indicated even then that she was still in quarantine. They kept her in quarantine for about a month or two after their flight. In late June, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals announced it would be rewarding a medal to Miss Baker and posthumously to Miss Abel in recognition of contribution by animals to humankind. William Rockefeller, and even this picture standing on the right, was their national president. He flew to Pensacola on June 22nd, 1959, and a small medal and a certificate of merit was given to Miss Baker. It was reported she tried to scamper away when flashbulbs began popping at the press conferences. And Rockefeller noted this was the first time the society had gone out of its way to recognize the value of scientific research and not condemn them. Um, American Society for Prevention of Cruelty, once they discovered the monkeys were being used, were really upset that animals were being put in dangerous conditions. And Rockefeller acknowledged that the tender and kind attention of the scientists involved. And the doctors noted that the next step were going to be determined for outer space was how to survive in extreme conditions and whether life could. And this is a photograph I found in our collection that kind of started me on this story. And this is a pretty picture of little Miss Baker and her certificate and her capsule and the tiny little medal from the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals around her neck. Now she returned to Pensacola to the Naval Aerospace Medical Research Laboratory, and she seemed in excellent condition and happy. And it was revealed in August by Pensacola scientists that in the days after her recovery and the news conferences, she frequently chewed on her tail, like a human baby sucking a thumb, and it stopped once she got back to Pensacola and rejoined all the other monkeys because the lab is still doing other kinds of experiments with the little monkey. They also gave her a military rating, MS1, meaning monkey base first class. And this is a book about her. This is a photograph. This is a newspaper article. I'm coming on to explain what's going on. That same August 1959, the Navy reported it was working hard to find a husband for Miss Baker, as well as build her a new and larger home. Scientists noted their goal was to find out if there might be any abnormality that might get passed on in pregnancy to radiation exposure. The press, however, called this announcement, oh, they're building a honeymoon cottage for her. And when they learned the new enclosure would be 7 feet wide, 5 feet deep, 7.5 feet tall, and this little monkey, as you can see, only about 7 inches tall, um, and they found out that the special facility would have formica walls, ceiling, a tile floor, and even air conditioning. Well, they really had a field day calling this a honeymoon cottage. She moved to this room on September 22nd, 1959. And they had a big window in it so that people could come and see her. Despite the national announcement of matchmaking, little was publicized until the Deputy Commander, Colonel Thurston T. Paul of the Army Missile Agency in Redstone of Alabama, announced on November 9, 1959, that she was pregnant. And the following day in Washington, Admiral Rickover, he was discussing nuclear submarines, and he announced, we can beat them. We can beat the Soviet Union in two things. First, we have the only pregnant space monkey, and second, we have the only atomic submarine ever to run into a whale. And that was big news at the time. But despite these announcements, the doctors at NAS said she's not pregnant. There'd been no attempts at pregnancy, and they planned to wait a couple years till she was a little older. And meanwhile, she continued to live a happy life at NAS. She was constantly visited by staff and visitors. A book was written about her, and Pensacola reveled in being home to her. In November 1959, the Pensacola area nurses held a two-day institute at NAF Pensacola, and they were all introduced to Miss Baker and got to see her. The Pensacola Chamber of Commerce heard a slide program about the history of Pensacola by Miss Ruby Baker, local tour guide, and she described the program was described as from the cliffs on Scenic Highway to the Ice Age and formed during the Ice Age to the Miss Baker, the area of contribution to the space age. In 1960 began, uh, she got more publicity. The December 1959 issue of the Journal of Aviation Medicine was devoted entirely to her exploit, and a children's book came out in March of 1960. The Pensacola News Journal that she reported that she got about 300 visitors a month coming out to the Naval Aerospace Hospital and seeing her through the glass viewing aid. They reported that, quote, she has learned that grammar school kids up to about 11 years old are very interested in her and the whole subject of space travel. She had discovered that high school students mostly don't have this interest and don't seem much interested in much of anything when they are taken through on tour. And she discovered that for adults, the way that they are crazy about being lectured by anyone who's wearing a white mock or a PhD degree. She had been a little amused to discover that there are some people type, owners of male monkeys, who will write letters purporting to be from their monkey and proposing marriage to her. Pensacola NAS officials stated she was retired from the space program because the public would be mad if she was sent up in space again. People would say that poor monkey has gone through so much already, she shouldn't be in jeopardy again. In November 1960, the Associated Press reported she had had a baby. That was quite a surprise to Pensacola NAS, um, and because she was not, and it was not true. And in 1960, if we moved into 1961, the Pensacola Naval Air Station also then began training the nation's first 7 astronauts, part of Project Mercury. On May 30th, 1962, tiny Miss Baker became the bride of Big John. The bride wore a tiny little veil made by Mrs. Joseph Lynn, wife of Captain Joseph Lynn, commanding officer of Softly Field. Big John wore a top hat and a bow tie just as long as it took him to hurl the hat across the cage. The press reported the happy couple would share her quarter away from the other monkeys and would not be bothering their neighbor for a cup of nuts. And she planned to keep her maiden name as a stage name, the paper reported. Sadly, on October 3rd, 1962, she gave birth to a 3-ounce stillborn male at Pensacola NAS. Effort to resuscitate the baby failed, but it reported the baby showed no ill effects. They were really concerned about did the cosmic radiation and the space travel affect the um, and the birth happened 75 minutes after Walter Schirra, America's fifth astronaut, was shot into space. Now, Big John had been removed from Miss Baker's quarters a month before, and he was returned, reunited with another attempt at birthing pregnancy. In September 1963, Miss Baker and Miss Big John were moved to building 1811, Apartment 1, which was a large brick building the Navy had built between the football field and the Navy Aviation Memorial Museum, and her original quarters were torn down. And the new quarters had larger and larger viewing wings. By 1966, the Naval Aviation School of Aviation Medicine had over 200 monkeys undergoing various aspects of space research, but its most famous occupant continued to be Miss Baker. She was retired, living a life of leisure, fed a carefully maintained diet of jello, eggs, monkey chow, fresh fruit, and water. NAF official noted they don't know how long the lifespan of a squirrel monkey is. She spends her day playing on the trapeze, basking in the sun, watching visitors. And she continued to get letters from school children, and her keeper noted they'd had to copy her footprint a number of times. Use a they would use an ink pad and imprint her footprint on various items and documents for a dignitary. She chatters rapidly, and her keeper noted that monkeys were good biters too. In June 1968, the Naval Aerospace Medical Center celebrated her ninth anniversary of her space flight. Well, she'd been here in Pensacola for 9 years, and she got a morsel of cake. The 10th anniversary in 1969, she threw the cake on the floor, demanding her special biscuits made of monkey chow and gelatin fortified with egg, vitamin, and mineral supplement. Vice Admiral Bernard Dreen, Chief of Naval Aviation Training, said she had set a precedent as the first woman on record to take a space flight with less than 40 pounds of luggage, and one of the few women who never antagonized the driver or hollered about going too fast. Probably in conjunction with the achievements in space, Miss Baker continued to read several hundred letters a month from children all over the world asking for pictures and autographs and footprints. Navy officials noted she got more mail than the Blue Angel, suggested that they change the sign over NAF Pensacola to Home of the Blue Angel and Miss Baker. 1971 marked big changes for her in her life. May she celebrated the 12th anniversary of her space flight, having been lived now in Pensacola for over 12 years. She celebrated with peanuts and animal crackers, life bananas. But upon completion of the new Alabama Space and Rocket Museum at Huntsville, Alabama, Dr. Werner von Braun pressured the Navy and other officials to have Miss Baker transferred to a new home there. After inspection of the proposed facility by Navy doctors and veterinarians, Miss Baker left Pensacola on June 30th, 1971, along with second husband Big George, and by all reports she continued to live in Huntsville, with receiving visitors and living happily there. On a side note, in 1973, and the Space Administrator James Fletcher fired the agency's top woman, Deputy Administrator Ruth Bates Harris, who ran the agency's Equal Opportunity Program. He became infuriated with her report, noting that the agency's affirmative action program was a near total failure. In one part of her report, she wrote, "There are no minority or female astronauts. There have been 3 females sent into space by NASA. 2 are Arabella and Anita, both spiders, the other Miss Baker, a monkey." Miss Baker continued to live happily in Huntsville. Um, on her 21st birthday, they had a reception for 1,000 invited guests. They dined on a birthday cake of red jelly topped with strawberries and bananas. And she also appeared on the Dinah Shore Show, 1976. And here she is with Dinah Shore and Ed Buckby, director of the center, Sandy Duncan, John Biner. And so she got around. She was quite, quite popular. And there were postcards made for her. Students wrote her from all over the world. She would appear on different publications, Galactic News, Monkey Knot, and all that. Now, before I get there, Miss Baker's second husband, Big George, died in January 1979, and in March 79, she wedded for the third time to Norman, age 5, who had lived at the Yerk Primate Center in Atlanta. Madison County District Judge Dan McCoy sealed the vows under the laws of monkey business, and since no one came forward to oppose the marriage, she declared the ceremony was completed. Although she never became pregnant again, she continued to live an active and happy life in attraction in Huntsville. By 1981, she was getting 1,000 letters a week from school children, and at 24 years old was estimated to be 104 in monkey year, or at least double the lifespan of known squirrel monkeys in captivity. In November 1984, at age 27, she was reported she was very sick with kidney failure, an ailment of old age. She died November 28th. I've got my wrong date here, I'm sorry. She died November 28th, 1984, at the age of 27 with acute acute kidney failure. She uh, she was taken to the small animal clinic at Auburn University School of Veterinary Medicine, and they actually did a autopsy because they wanted to really be sure that what did she pass away from. Um, and they determined it was respiratory complication due to kidney failure. Pensacola NAS staff noted that she could charm anybody with her nice disposition, and they were very sorry about her move from Pensacola. She was interred at the Alabama Space and Rocket Center with a memorial service on December 4th, 1984. Center director read tribute from Alan Shepard and John Glenn and noted that she was, quote, the smallest historic artifact from America's space program, but unquestionably the warmest and most affectionate. Her gray marker at the entrance to the Huntsville Museum reads Miss Baker, squirrel monkey, born 1957, died November 29, 1984, first animal to fly in space and return alive. And for telling the story of our Pensacola's first astronaut, the road to any great achievement always begins with small steps, and our race to the moon comes from our legacy of those who have gone before, especially that of Miss Baker, Pensacola's first astronaut, and America's first space traveler to return from space alive. And thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this story today. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Mm-hmm.